Welcome back to Capsule. And if you haven't been here before to this wonderful event we put on, before we get into it, I want to make a short statement about the events that have happened here in Minneapolis. We put on this series and bring brands and people together. The essence of creativity is connecting two divergent things. And we have a lot of divergence going on right now. And I think there need to be more people connecting, having conversations. We live in a time when trust is declining in a big way and is creating a lot more divide. And that's very sad to see. And you can see these chasms here in Minnesota. So we want to make sure we express our unwavering love for our neighbors and for the people of our state, and the hope that we won't be in the news next month, or maybe the next month after that at some point in time. There isn't an easy way out, but I think we need to be more discerning. We need to hold back on the snap judgments on things, which is we are in a snap judgment culture, and that's painful. So that's what we think about. That's how we look at this, because that's how we look at brands. That's how we look at brands as really the best representation of us in the world. So with that in mind, we're going to have a lovely conversation hosted by Laura and Dustin. I want to make sure I announce our partners. Oh, thank you. No, I've got it. I'm good. First, Lake One, who is our shyest sponsor. He never shows up, but we absolutely love and adore him. But someday he'll show up as he does, Ryan Rudd. If you can look up Ryan Rudd on LinkedIn and send him a LinkedIn invitation and say that we'd really like to meet at some point in time, that'll overcome his shyness. And then, of course, RSP Architects, the architectural firm that designed or brought back this building into its beautiful form. Absolutely adore what they've done. And then we have a new thing we're doing. Once a quarter, we're going to have a different partner on the nonprofit side. So NMDP, which you might know for bone marrow donations and all kinds of other wonderful things. They're going to be here. Participate with them before or after. They're going to be here for the full quarter. And we'll talk more about that at future events. And so we're so happy to have you as a partner with our event every month. Awesome. That's it for me. I'm going to pass it back to Dustin, and he's going to get into it.
Thanks, Aaron. Two more little housekeeping things. One, just want to announce that a silver ring was found just in the front area here.
Oh, that's fine.
Eric, if you want to try and beat the woman in the crowd who raised her hand to the concessions table, that's where it is. So whenever you want to grab that. Secondly, we're giving away 2 posters from Capsule's series that was celebrating the anniversary. That was last year, but we'll extend the celebration because we love you all so much. Laura, choose 2 names out of here. 2.
Jill Lipsky-Kane.
All right, Jill Lipsky-Kane.
And Chris Eilers.
All right.
Okay.
I'm not sure who's manning the posters, but Ellen is in the red shirt. Feel free to talk to Ellen at any point. Grab your poster. Alrighty. Okay, without further ado, my name is Dustin Stadelska. I work at Capsule with Aaron. I'm a brand communication strategist. I do research, writing, all things brand strategy. I'm here with Laura King. Laura, if you just want to say a couple words about yourself.
You're making me describe myself?
Just a little.
That's really hard. Hi, I'm Laura King. I am lots of things. A mom to 4 boys, an executive recruiter, an author, a speaker, and excited to facilitate here. Thank you.
Yeah, Laura will be jumping in with many insights, adding to what our speakers are saying and helping the conversation go smoothly while I kind of drive the bus. But you're all here to see our 2 very accomplished guests, Eric Ryan and David Rubin, on the big screen behind me. A little bit about each of them, and they'll say a little more. Eric Ryan describes himself, I think, accurately as a serial entrepreneur, investor, and advisor. He's the founder of brands you've no doubt encountered on the shelves: Method, Olly, Welly, and Cast, a jewelry brand. He has numerous accolades, many of them related to sustainability and brands. For example, named as an eco-revolutionary by Time Magazine. Also a Fortune 40 under 40. And he happened to get his start at Fallon. So a person who has not only a knack for ideas, but clearly a knack for the work it takes to bring those ideas to life. And I'm sure we'll talk about that. So thank you, Ryan, for being here. And also David Rubin. David is the Chief Brand and Communications Officer at the New York Times. And he's been with the Times for a while. Also the publisher of Wirecutter, formerly the CMO of the New York Times, formerly the head of brand at Pinterest, spent 12 years at Unilever as a brand director, leading product line growth for numerous household brands, including Axe body spray. So the connection, the Axe body spray to New York Times pipeline, I'm sure, is a strong one. But clearly someone who is seriously experienced as a brand marketer, and will have many insights for us. So welcome, Eric and David. First question, Eric, if you'd like to start, just anything you'd add to introduce yourself and a little bit about your journey that helped shape you as the leader of brands you are today.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, thanks for the great job on the opening remarks of everything going on in Minneapolis. And I've lived in Minneapolis. I was there last week. I'm there regularly. So I'm sorry this continues to go on to, I can't think of a better city. So hang in there, everybody. I know with everything going on in the background. First of all, I apologize I couldn't be there in person. It'd be a lot more fun than sitting here at Zoom on home. As far as my journey, I think for me, I've just had a series of kind of major shifts that have shaped my career. It started working in London as an intern where I just happened to go to an agency that had a planning department, and then I just happened to end up in Minneapolis because it had the best best planning department under Rob White at Fallon in the mid '90s. And then I ended up at a car count in San Francisco where I just happened to piss off the agency because I was spending so much time with the car designers trying to create better cars. And I got pulled aside by the account manager, and he's like, Eric, he's like, we don't make money by helping them create cars. We make money by creating ads. It's like, but if they have better cars, wouldn't we have better ads? And that was the realization for me. It was time to go be an entrepreneur. So everything you could see that's my entire way that I work as an entrepreneur was really formed there at the AT&T Tower at Fallon as a planner.
Thank you so much. David, same question, bit more about your journey, what shaped you into the brand leader you are today.
Yeah, you stole all my jokes about Axe being a straight line to the New York Times, so I can't.
Sorry,
I can't pull that one out. No, I think that I often get asked, if I went from Axe and hair care and 16 years at Unilever to Pinterest and then the Times, have I changed jobs 3 times? And I think some people look at it that way. It's not how I look at it. I think I've had a very similar role in across all of those years. And for me, it's, I believe that all products are bought for lots of reasons, but that they're emotional and functional, and they're more emotional than functional. And so my role has been to unlock that. Why is someone want this thing that we're offering, and how do we talk about it in a way that makes people excited about it, feel its benefit, love it, and be a passionate fan. I said at Unilever that I like turning the mundane into the magical. I don't know that the New York Times is mundane, but news is historically a sea of sameness. And I think what we've been doing is trying to tell how we're different and what makes us special. And as we've done that, we've also enjoyed a lot of growth.
Maybe just say a little bit more about that, emotional and functional, specifically for a media brand, for a news brand. my bias is that I don't think of the news as an emotional thing, but clearly you're saying there's that element to it, at least at the brand level. So how does that balance sit with the New York Times?
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, I think the news is an incredibly emotional thing. Just look at how many people want to talk about their news provider, right? Either nicely or not nicely. And just look at the opening comments, which agreeing with Eric and Aaron. But just I'm sure all of you in that room understand that, the news can be very emotional. I think that ultimately what we are doing here at the Times is we seek the truth and help people understand the world. And that might sound functional, but it really isn't. That what we believe is that society and a democracy are better off if we have a shared fact base. And the reporting that a trusted independent news source can provides that fact base. Now, it may feel like we have less of a shared fact base than we've had in the past, and that may be a factor of the media environments that we're in. But we're still better off when there is more shared facts than fewer. And we see our role as trying to just unearth what happened wherever those facts lead. And we see that, a lot of people who agree with that find that being, something that's very important to them and to the country. Another thing that's worth saying is we have the news product, we'll probably talk about this more as we go forward, but we also have lots of other products. We have cooking, games. We have Wirecutter that you mentioned, which is shopping advice. We have The Athletic, which is sports. And all of those are supposed to be sort of all your passion points where news and information are central. And so that's another way that we're emotional, is that we're not just, like I said, we help people understand the world. That is a literal thing of we are covering the whole world, but it's also a figurative thing of all the things that you as an individual care about. And that's another way that we tap into the emotional side of people's relationship.
Yeah, I think you're making me think about it much more deeply now. Yeah, perhaps the information we consume as the sensory experience we consume about the world around us, maybe that's the most emotional thing of all. But that's a different discussion.
The voice of the people here and just like speak just what's coming up for me as I'm listening here is how do we know what's truth?
So one of the things that we believe, that's a very deep question.
I mean, can't you solve it in like 5 minutes for me?
Yeah,
right
exactly.
now?
2.5 should be easy.
Great.
But what I would say is that we do believe that having an independent person, journalists really, but if we want to call it an individual, look into something, following a process with lots of resources and providing that information. When we put something on our pages, it's because we have verified it to meeting our standards, which are very rigorous. And not everybody realizes that. And sometimes we get in trouble for things that we haven't printed. And the reason is that even though people might believe them to be true, we were unable to verify them, and up to the standard. Having that gives, and this is why what we see often is that the more uncertain people are, the more they turn to the older news sources. You saw that in COVID. And it's because people are, just like you said, looking for what they can trust. And I think I'd like to think that if you see it in the New York Times pages, that we have at least done the work, that we believe that to be, to the best of our knowledge and a rigorous process, to be something that happened the way we're describing it and with the words we're using to describe it. What you as an individual have decided is your worldview, and what you want to, what you're believing obviously is larger than that. But that when you connect with us and get that information, that we have done it to the best of our ability and to our standards. And I think that's at least one way on the path to the truth. The thing that I think has changed is sometimes, we think that the reader is on the path to the truth. We are providing reporting, facts, information, perspective, all of those things to help you with your journey.
That was pretty good for 2.5 minutes.
I might have been over by 20 seconds or
No,
something.
that was perfect.
I don't know if it's older,
E-
but
Eric, I want to ask you about that sort of emotional functional duality as something that's so foundational. Um, a multivitamin seems super functional. How have you thought about melding the two in categories that don't on their face also seem hyper emotional?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of my model has been I look for these categories that are unnecessarily complicated and take themselves too serious. And I find if a category takes themselves self too serious, like a human being, like they're hiding something. And usually what they're hiding is like their product is fairly commoditized like everybody else's. And I love this model of going into these highly functional categories and then finding ways to elevate the emotion and find an emotional connection in it. So, in the case of Method, you hate to clean, but creating a cleaner that made that experience much more pleasant. People hate to take vitamins, so making the vitamins something you look forward to. And I think fundamentally, I believe like all marketing if it's successful, has to be emotional first and functional second. But the function is what like then earns the right to have more emotion over time. And a big part of my model is like finding that creative tension. Um, and Method was the first place we did it where it was high design and deep sustainability. Like those never went together. Either you had a very ugly looking environmental product or you had a very stylish product that was bad for the environment. And when you can create that creative tension, I think that's what creates real magic in brands. And a lot of times it's just as simple as like trying to create style and substance. And so you'll see that as a common thread between all of the CPG brands I've gone, and I love functional brands because it means it's an annuity. It's something you need and you'll keep going back to. But if you then can create that emotional connection in it, then you create the loyalty back to your brand. Another way I think about it is like the intersection of altruism and narcissism. So if you look at our products, like we give you really narcissist reasons to buy it. So in the case of Method, like it's beautiful, and you look at it just so more than you use it. So I could argue that's part of the function. But they're beautiful, the fragrance, and at the same time, it's good for you and good for the planet. And so we often lead with the narcissism as reasons to try our product, but then we find the altruism is why you stay loyal to it over time.
I just have to bet that the recruiter in me just wants to understand, Eric. Like, did you grow up thinking like I'm going to do this? Like, did you have an image like when you were a young boy, like this is what I'm going to do with my career? Like, how like some people grow up and they're like, I'm going to be a doctor. They just know that. Did you know that this was going to be like the serial entrepreneur path for
Well,
you?
I grew up in a family. My great grandfather and grandfather were entrepreneurs. My great grandfather dropped out of pharmacy school, moved to Detroit, worked for Ford when Henry was still there, and then they eventually started a machine and stamping company. So I think growing up in a family where that I was like, oh, that's normal. But no, when I was in the third grade, I was building Legos, and I realized I was creating office buildings versus spaceships. That I just always since the third grade, I was like, yep, I'm going to be an entrepreneur, and I was that annoying kid selling buttons or I was making hockey nets to sell. I was always building and making something to sell. So
So you kind
yeah,
of had
since
like
the
a
third grade, I knew this
no
is what I was
fear.
going to do.
Like you were encouraged as a kid, just like no fear, like just keep inventing, keep creating, keep innovating. Was that like was
Yeah,
that
I
was
think
that part of just your upbringing?
yeah, I think it's more. I mean, my parents are like super optimist. It's where I get it from. So like, yeah, be whatever you want to be. You can do it. Yeah, but it's more of like my internal drive of like I just like love making and building, and I was reading every entrepreneur book I could as a kid, and it just was like I never ever thought about anything other than that.
Okay, because I want to ask just one last question on this piece, and then I
Yeah.
can like stop asking the childhood questions.
Yeah, let's talk about
Um,
me all day. This is great.
but what advice would you give to someone who maybe has had much a more traditional background, like if they're just like kind of like curious of like I want to stretch these muscles, right? Of necessarily even being an entrepreneur, but like doing something more creative or outside the box. Like, what would you tell someone?
Well, I think first of all, it's never been easier to be creative with all the tools and AI at our disposal. But my advice is always, I think everybody gets, especially like on an entrepreneur journey or doing something that, in their mind is like they want to do something really big. They get so caught up on the end result from where they're sitting. They're like, oh my God, it's so overwhelming how I'm going to get there. And the mechanics of doing something, creating or building something or being an entrepreneur, like the mechanics are actually quite easy. It's the mental game. That's what gets in the way and the self-doubt. And so my advice to everybody is like, first of all, like, don't worry about starting a company. Just figure out like, do I have a good idea? And that's a lot of what I followed that path with Method of like the first thing I did was like I just created this concept book, gave it to the 20 smartest people I knew, and I didn't tell them like tell me what you like about it because they're always gonna come up with good things. I told them shoot holes, come back and give me 3 reasons why this is gonna fail. And then when nobody could come up with a strong enough reason, then I was like, okay, that gave me the confidence to like Adam and I like, well, let's create a prototype. And then we gave it our friends to use, and they liked it. So like, okay, well, let's create enough prototypes. Let's go put it in one store. So it's like that step by step, and then before you know it, you've created a company. But it always starts with like just proving, do I have a good idea?
I feel like David might want to riff off something. I can sense he's like he wants to jump in.
No, I mean, all that's great. And I just think that creativity comes in lots of sizes and shapes too. Like, one of the things that Unilever always taught was how to lead creativity. I'm not a designer. I've never worked in an ad agency, but I've worked on a lot of campaigns, and I'd like to think that I create the environment where we can make really creative work. And I've worked on a lot of work that's won a lot of awards. And I think even that is something, like there's lots of different ways that you can be part of a creative process. I wouldn't work in a role where I didn't think there was a lot of creative to make. I also don't do a lot of the creation myself. So I just think there's lots of ways to do that.
Well, maybe let's, as a non-designer as well, I think of creativity as a little bit more of like decisions I might not otherwise make because I'm looking outside the box for reasons to make them that are still good reasons. I'm curious, David, you talked about how the New York Times, it's a central brand, but it's expanding into these other arenas, cooking, the athletic, Wirecutter, not just the news. That's an arm of it. I'm curious about the sort of creativity and strategy behind expanding that brand. That is known for the news, a heritage brand. How do you think about expanding it outwards from there?
Yeah. So I mean, look, the way we think about it, we have an analogy we use here, which is a solar system analogy. So if you'll bear with me, we think of news as the sun. I think astronomically it's still a planet. It's just a big planet that everybody else revolves around, right? And if it weren't for the sun, for the news, the other things we had would mean a lot less and probably wouldn't exist, right? Those other things do exert some influence on the sun, just not nearly as much as the sun does on them. And so we think it's a pretty good analogy for us. That whole solar system is the solar system of sort of your passion areas, of things that you care about where news and information are important and valuable. And so we are providing understanding across your life, first through news and centrally through news. And a lot of our sort of brand values come from there, right? But those others benefit from that and contribute to it. And so, and then it's sort of more functionally, we think the best experience and the one that we try to encourage you to get is what we call the bundle. It's where you're getting all of that for one price. But if you want to get cooking or games or sports, you can get a subscription to those. Usually when you're first coming in, we will make the total bundle the best offer, because we believe then we have a time to show you how the whole is better than the one thing you thought you wanted. But if you want just the one thing, we'll also give you that.
Okay, I'm going to run with that analogy and turn it back to Eric and say, you weren't handed a brand with a super long legacy that already has gravity around it that you need to sort of work within. So how do you think about creating the point of gravity for a given brand like Welly? What kind of things go through your mind? How do you decide that?
Yeah, I think in a lot of ways it's easier to start with a blank sheet of paper often than having to navigate legacy issues of a brand. And usually at that point too, there's a lot of stakeholders involved too. So for, David's situation, that can be so much harder than for my situation. So for me, I've got a couple frameworks that I work with. Really the fundamental framework though is I don't start with ideas, I start with categories. And I look at a category and I try to figure out like what is the cultural shift or macro trend that that category is missing. In the case of Method, this is back in 2000, so at the turn of the century, it was this idea of lifestyling of the home that you could see like HGTV had just launched in the US and MTV had Rock the Crib and IKEA had just arrived and Pottery Barn was starting to blow up, and it was the first time Americans were really thinking at the mass level about their home as a form of self-expression. So I was like, okay, we have this huge macro trend of lifestyle design in the home, but yet these products are designed to be hidden underneath your sink, out of sight, out of mind. And then at the same time, we had this other huge kind of cultural shift towards health and wellness and sustainability. And you were asked to pollute when you clean and use poison to make your home healthier. At the time, you could only buy a natural cleaner in a natural store. And so those were the two big macro trends of high design and deep sustainability that we built Method off of. In the case of Olly, when we started looking at the vitamin aisle and it was like a dog's breakfast, it was just bad design. It was hard to shop. People would stress out to choose something that's healthy for them. And as I was trying to figure out what is that like, I think you said it well, that point of gravity, I realized like, well, every generation has a different relationship to health. And this is when Soul Cycle was starting to take off. And I was like, okay, well, millennials view health and wellness as a lifestyle pursuit. What if we reimagine the vitamin more as a lifestyle product? So that's kind of like the core focus. And then I do a lot of like, appropriation, which is a fancy word for stealing. So I'll take from one category to another. So in the case of Method, I stole a lot from personal care. I brought the fragrances, the designs, and I wanted to be like blur the lines of where do you end and your home begins. In the case of Ollie, I stole a lot from the beauty aisle. I wanted to look like a beauty product that just got misplaced in the nutrition aisle. In the case of Welly, I kind of stole from the past. I went back to like tin, where our grandmother would keep these old Band-Aid tin packaging where they put safety pins and buttons in it. And I wanted to feel more like almost like an accessory of like what North Face would sell you, for an adventure. But it was really about selling from the past. And the insight there too was like actually an injury is a trophy of a well-lived life. So let's celebrate the injury versus, try to blend it away. So those are kind of my key frameworks. I'm a little geeky about it, but how I kind of frame up the way that I think about it. And then I look for like, again, go back to that tension of rational and emotional, and how do I bake that tension into this brand?
Awesome. That is super insightful, I think, to just hear your thought process on those. And I really appreciate the notes about inspiration. I think stealing is a ungenerous word for noticing things astutely. So, David, I guess I would turn that on to you. Have there been any moments, whether at the New York Times or before, where you've taken inspiration or keen observation from something that was out of category and applied it to your work?
Yeah, I just want to agree with Eric. I love that appropriation concept. I say the same. I mean, it's just much easier to sort of think about how you apply a model you can see than to like entirely invent something. And I do think the sort of fresh application of it to a new area is in itself a new, is creation. I mean, the best example for me was when we launched Axe Body Spray, again, back close to Eric's Method time. So it was 2002. Um, we were bringing Axe to the US, and the entire launch was centered on a question, which so remember, this is targeted to sort of college age guys. Back in 2002, movies were the center of culture for them. And so we asked the question of how would a movie studio launch a deodorant? And that obviously we didn't literally do so. Most movie studios spent more money than we did. But that concept and that sort of simple framing of if a movie studio was launching a deodorant made it almost certain that what we were doing was going to feel different and fresh to our audience, because that's not how anybody else marketed a deodorant. They marketed deodorants on how many hours can it protect you. And so and at the times, slightly less literal as that, but we've often sort of, or I've sort of often thought about, particularly when I first got here, of sort of the reason I came here, because I was coming from Pinterest. I saw myself as someone who had shifted into digital marketing, and I came here because I saw the Times as that, and I saw the Times as a nonfiction Netflix. And so I think lots of what we've done here have asked ourselves less, what would a newspaper do, and what would a Netflix or a Spotify or a streaming service, how did they build relationships? Actually, even my being here is sort of an example of that, is that why would the Times hire somebody who spent 16 years in consumer products? It's because it was starting to think of itself more as a, national and global consumer product with a subscription than as, say, a media company driven primarily by an ad model.
Okay, this is not in the script. This is what I do. I just like pay attention and ask questions when I see them. So how the two of you stay, like, I would imagine you're both well read, well informed, keeping up to date with these trends, with these socioeconomic and just even like kind of give us a glimpse as to what trusted voices that you bring around you to either sharpen your thinking or challenge your thinking. So that, and how you like, what do you read?
I figure you're a journalist, the journalist side, David. You should go first on this one.
I,
I'll try to follow up.
yes, I am not a journalist, but look, I think it's a few things. One is just being a voracious consumer of everything. Um, I do think that I just like asking people questions. It's if you see somebody doing something, Unilever trained us to do this, to not be afraid to go up to people and just talk to them. What are you doing? Why are you doing that? What's the thing you're using? I will say having teenage children is helpful. Their friends, and just what are they using? They are, such voracious consumers that I always love trying to impress them when I know what they're going to bring up to me. Um, uh, um, and then I think beyond that, like I was saying, I think breadth is a big part of it, but I also like Eric's point of I think you also want to have some things that you start to build a thesis around and really try to go deeper in understanding, so that you're not just sort of, let me try a little of this, let me try a little of that, but let me go deep on a topic or and really try to sort of not just understand it academically, but to use it as a person, I know a lot of people in marketing are trying to do that with AI at the moment, just how do I use it myself? How do I use it like my kids? How do I use it like the next generation are going to use it?
So you actually believe you have to use something to understand it?
Yeah.
As a leader, you have to
Yes.
use it and consume it.
I agree with that. I was trying to think if I
shoes.
wouldn't agree with that, but yeah, no, I think that's right. And I think you want to make sure that you really can, at least that you're able to use it, that you understand how people are using it. I think, looking at almost, while I am not a journalist, but thank you for that, Eric.
You're around them all day, close enough.
Yes, I am. Well, and that's right. And what's rubbed
You're
off
fun.
on me is that journalists work so often on things they know nothing about before they start. And I think that question of sort of how do you look at this from, I just want to understand it, and I want to understand how it is fitting into people's lives, and then throw yourself wholeheartedly into that.
Yeah, I have three kids. I don't read nearly as much as I would like to read. My learning style is a lot through doing, and I really pay attention to I try to pick up on patterns and look for connections, just through my daily work, whether that's walking through a store or talking to somebody. I think the areas I get the most learning and outlet. I need to update my bio, but I joined Greycroft. We launched a new dedicated consumer fund, so all day, regularly looking at brands, and I'm learning so much by seeing what other people are doing and kind of connecting the dots to that. Spending a lot of time talking to entrepreneurs. But and I have a column on Forbes too, and so interviewing people, I found I get so much great learning out of. My biggest hack right now is really like ChatGPT, and I use it to kind of write my own little reports. And I think if you have a curious mind, it is such an amazing tool for going deep on things. So I'm spending less time, I feel like, reading and more time like researching topics on chat, pulling my own reports and digging into it. And then trying to find those like disparate patterns together that inspire me.
Uh, this might be something that would come up anyway. So I want to stick with the AI question just for now. And I appreciate the use case you're putting out there as a sort of way to wrap your head around things, generate reports, stay on top of a world that is moving just insanely fast. Um, how do you square the circle of a tool that allows you to work that quickly with brands that are meant to maybe stand for something a little bit longer than that? David, I imagine this is maybe there's more friction in your work, maybe not at a media organization, but just curious for your reactions.
Yeah, I don't know if this is going to answer your question, but you know, in a world where, as I think Eric started off his first answer this way, is that in a world where anyone can use these tools and create, and where the volume of creation is, or creative output is just going to be unfathomable. And most of it will be low quality, and much of it at the very best, unverifiable accuracy. Um, uh, we think that in that world, trusted brands, particularly in our space, but just in general, are going to become more and more important. I actually think that the market for sort of quality, thoughtful, long-term, trusted I think actually in the digital era, it's been almost impossible to build brands and to have them last. Particularly brands that don't have physical presences. And we tend to wonder if we might, if this era ends up where it looks like it's going, if that may reverse some. Because in the end, you're going to have to decide where you go for something and who you rely on, and what are your markers of that? How do you know? And trust, reputation, legacy, some of these things are the only real markers you're going to have.
Well, let's talk about designing for trust then, and I mean that in the product sense, but also the brand sense. So, um, Eric, you can start if you want, but what are some ways you feel like you've thought through the process of designing trust into a product and a brand? And maybe for both of you, like, what are some, slippery stones in the stream that are like easy ways to shatter a little bit of trust in a product or a brand?
Yeah, it's funny. You think like trust would matter more than ever, but yet it's like our president can just openly lie, and like there's just no trust, and it seems like it doesn't matter anymore. And it's interesting how it comes to branding and marketing, particularly with TikTok. I'm just amazed. I just looked at this deal recently. We passed on it, and they're showing, it was tempting because they're just showing insane numbers of growth. And then I just caught that I had not seen before one of their TikTok ads comparing it to basically a drug that was like beyond inappropriate to be able to make that comparison, but they're getting away with it. And the crap that you get out of Amazon today, products that show up. So it's interesting, like the role of trust. And I've just like been such, I think coming out of my era, just like a student of like everything. A brand is nothing more than a badge of trust and a promise, right? And I was thinking like trust is like what you do in those moments where nobody's looking. And the way we built our companies, it was all about great culture and great products. The products are a souvenir of the culture. And I try to build these cultures that was all about doing the right thing. And we live in this transparent world. So even if we didn't want, like it was all, Adam and I chose a natural cleaner, not because it made any business sense at the time, a lot just because it was the right thing to do versus putting pretty little bottles of poison on people's countertops. And so for me, it's fascinating how this is shifting. I really think that for me, the way I've approached it is like trust is every little touch point, from even like the little things we put in the bottom of a bottle that you might discover one day. And it was the entire experience. But I just like was always so safeguarding trust with our brands. And today it seems like less and less important. I'm still trying to get my head around how it's quickly evolving here, particularly in the world of TikTok. But I don't have a great answer to it because I'm just kind of dumbfounded. But it's seeing like, being on the M&A side as well. I've seen some really impressive brands and companies that have been built, but they can't sell because they've just never built, like nobody really trust them or trust their product or what they've done. They've built a beautiful P&L, but they lack the ability to have that longevity there, because they didn't build that trust over time. Maybe you may have a better answer. I might be able to build on it.
I mean, I certainly don't have the formula. I wish I work in an industry that has had 30 years of straight declines of the answer to do you trust the news? But I will say, look, our business is doing quite well, and we have many more people reading and subscribing to us than we've ever had, at the height of our print era, or at any time in our history. So, we've got over 12 million subscribers, 50 to 100 million readers every week. These are much larger numbers than when people think of like the heyday of news. And so it's, I do think there's something to, your point that sort of what brand is a promise, and really what trust is a promise. And I think it's as simple as when you make a promise and fulfill it, you build trust. And when you make a promise and don't fulfill it, you lose it. And I'm trying to think in terms that are wider than the news, and the same thing in all products. And I think for us, our promise is that we're gonna seek out the facts and we're gonna report them to you no matter where they lead. And so if we share something that, was surprising or unusual or frankly, something that you wish not to be true, I still think we're adding trust to ourselves, because ultimately that's what our promise is, right? Is that we're going to do that. And you may not like what you read, but hopefully at some point you like that we did the process and offered it to you. And so what's new for us is that, historically, journalists were taught to keep themselves out of the news, not talk about themselves. And we are doing a whole lot more to try to show you how we do that process and what is our commitment to that process. The print paper was this wonderfully, really maybe the world's best designed thing ever. It built trust inherently into itself. They had 300 years to put it together, right? And in a digital environment where we're often putting our own content in other people's platforms, many of those markers of trust just don't work, right? You're reading articles much more atomically. And so what we've been doing and what we're steadily doing is finding more ways to show you those markers so that you know why you can trust it. I don't know if there are listeners to The Daily as an example in the audience. The Daily is our, very successful podcast, the #2 podcast in the country. And while it provides the news, you also get a look into how the people did the news. And that provides a level of sort of insight that that engenders trust. You also get to hear it from the reporter to themselves. If anybody has been noticing, we're doing a whole lot more what we call, reporter videos showing, here's what I saw on the ground. Here's what I did here. Many of those kinds of things were things that 10, 15 years ago, we would have not done, maybe thought weren't the right things to do even. And today we're doing those things because that shows you not just what's happening, but why you can trust this person. What have they done to do this work?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, you're showing us the how.
I was
You're
just
showing
real
us
quick
the how.
too. Yeah.
Well, what's interesting is, look, if we look at this in marketing terms, the classic sort of how the sausage gets made ads often don't work, right? Because like nobody cares, as a classic marketer, I would have thought nobody cares how you did it. They just want to know what they're getting, right? And I don't think that's so true anymore. I think obviously you can do it in ways that are boring and you can do it in ways that are interesting. And the more you're talking about the self, the more interesting you need to be. But I do think that people do care, and I think they care in things well beyond our, the category I work in.
It's just I was thinking about how Vogue has brought back the glossy. And again, like there's something about that physical, medium of paper that is such a relic of trust when it's printed versus in digital. And I thought that was like such a smart move by Vogue to do that and make that matter again.
Yeah, I want to underline that point as well, that the context, the point that you made, David, the context that a product, that a brand shows up in, the structural context impacts the trust as well. a story on acknowledged from the New York Times that shows up on a different website impacts the trust. The form factor of a newspaper with an understood format versus something that's printed off in a more ad hoc way impacts the trust. It's not just the product, the information, whatever. I think that's critical to understand, and as well acknowledging that context radiates outward from there. So there's layers upon layers of these things building off of each other. It's a strategist's job to understand how all those come together and how to best navigate them, but it's critically complex. Taking 300 years to get to a form factor that really does that well begins to make more sense, I think, with that point in mind. This is the time where we turn to our audience for some questions, and Laura and I will run around with the microphones, but just raise your hand if you have a question for either Eric, David, or both, and we will find you. Aaron's over here with a question.
Okay. I love that we're talking trust and where we're signals of trust and how that's important. I love it. And Eric, you look beautiful up there. You're looking great. But I love you to talk about failure and how that does contribute, right? I'd love you to tell the teardrop story early on in Method. Not everybody would know that. It's a beautiful story, and the honesty, I think, brings trust. And David, you tell any failure story you want, whatever. I'm sure you've got maybe one or two.
Yeah, you cannot be a successful entrepreneur without not only having failure, but embracing failure and, of course, learning from it. And I was like, God, I got to update my bio because you mentioned Cast, which I had to wind down last year. And I always wanted to build my own retail expression. And we had 3 stores, and Nordstrom invested $2 million in us and brought all these great celebrities. We had great product market fit, but ultimately I chose a category. I chose the jewelry category because it had that same, like every time you walk into a jewelry store, it's the most intimidating experience. You have to ask the world's smallest price tag to be turned over, give a reaction to it, and you're just like intimidated. It was like the big insight was women are driving the growth of self-purchasing fine jewelry at that higher price point, and nobody is really creating a brand experience for them. And I wanted women to walk into a store and hear Willy Wonka, pure imagination playing in their head and feel like a kid in a candy store. And that was like potential I was trying to create. And we successfully did that. But I chose a category that was capital intensive and really, really hard to get to a place of profitability. And ultimately, when gold pricing spiking, tariffs hitting, it just became unrealistic to be able to um, get funding, and that was on me of choosing a really hard space. So I just came off a really big failure and trying to work through it. What was the teardrop story? Because that one was successful. Unless you're thinking of another one, Block maybe.
The original Kareem Rashid, it wasn't really a failure.
Oh,
It was really successful.
dish soap. Oh, I should have grabbed it. Handed
Dish
here.
soap, yeah. That's
Yeah. So we were working with Kara. We had this. I really wanted to make a statement about design, and so we commissioned him to create our first industrial design products, and part of it was a dish soap. And I looked at that. I forgot which stapler it was, but they finally designed it so it sit upright, because whenever you pick up a stapler, you pick it up like this. So why avoid that motion? So I was like, why don't we do that with the dish soap? You're always picking it and flipping it over. So it was really the first ever bottom dispensing product that I could find. This new valve had just came out, so we used that. And it made just a huge statement, but it also made a huge mess. And we had a real problem with people on shelf pulling off the cap the wrong way to smell the fragrances, which were super novel at the time. And then it would just like rain dish soap over the rest of our products, which is a really hard way to sell soap when it's covered in soap. It was $5, but yet we were making no money on it because it was so hard to fill. But I would bet that Method would never have been successful without it, because what it did was it got us into Target because we made a huge statement to them. It got our investors, it got the press, media, And it really put us on the map, even though that product was not commercially successful. And one of the things I learned along the way is, how you have to iterate. And if you go more than one deviation off of where a category is, you've got a chance for success. If you go two or more deviations off, you lose the consumer because then there's the consumer adoption gets harder. There's education that needs to be required, and that's what we did. We did like two deviations off of it. Where our hand wash, the teardrop, we launched around the same time. Just really simple, elegant. It was meant to kind of mimic a vase sitting there on your sink. It was one deviation, and that is still just been a monster hit for the brand.
Um, I just want to build on that. I think that, you know, I'll do an example, but I think it's a philosophy. I don't really love the idea of sort of success and failure. I mean, I will say I don't launch a lot of like products that I fund myself and like where you sort of you're in market or you're not in market. But in general, your point about sort of learning from it and building from it, I think it's more about, I mean, obviously you don't want to keep doing things that are not going to work. But I think the mindset is to challenge oneself of what can I learn from this and then bring this into something else. And um, I think that actually starts before you even know the results. It starts in the design of as long as something is good, you're going to try is going to do something that's going to teach you something that's going to be valuable, then whether it wins or loses in that specific, game doesn't really matter. So I didn't launch this. I wasn't here yet, but we had a product when I got here in 2016 called MYT Now, which was something that was, invented in the um, early teens there to try to capitalize on the digital environment and a younger audience. And it didn't stay as a standalone product. We shut it down. I was here for the decision to do that, made that decision. But the big reason that we had to shut it down was that so much of what it was doing that was working well was then brought into the core product, which until we had made this, we would never have done. You know, um, shorter headlines, uh, more understanding of what of some of the stuff we were talking about before about what a reporter's doing, different formats, all of that got brought in shorter stories. And all that ended up getting brought into the core product, at which point this product was then competitive with our original, and we didn't want to keep two. But so it was that a failure? Well, the product isn't still here, but the success that we saw starting in 2016 through to today of just disproportionate growth. When I joined in 2016, we have 1.5 million subscribers. Today we have 12, and that's only in less than 10 years. That wouldn't have happened if it weren't for some of those experiments. So I reject the notion of failure.
I call it expensive learning.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Good. I like that.
All right, we have another question.
Hello. Oh, it's loud. Okay. My name is Brooke. I have a question that's kind of like, it centers around longevity and trust, and it's kind of two-pronged, so bear with me here. For Eric, you mentioned your framework for creating companies, sort of finding categories and looking at the cultural shifts. I guess, how do you balance that with sort of a longevity of just core messaging? Like, for example, if we take Ford, like you mentioned, right? Their thing is American manufactured, American made, American bought, etc. And so, despite how long that company has been around for, it still maintained that messaging. So, how do you do that while also balancing sort of finding those cultural shifts? And then on the other side of that, David, how do you take risks within a company and sort of go into a new venture while also maintaining that trust? Like, I think for NYT, the first thing that comes to mind is Wordle, right? That was a big thing that NYT bought and sort of integrated into their system while not necessarily being one of the main things people know NYT for. And I still play it, so something's working, obviously. And yeah, that's my question.
Yeah, on the Ford credit, it's funny too, because like with Farley being CEO, who was a former CMO, I would expect their advertising and marketing and just branding would be really, really good. And there's definitely pockets of it. But I think with for a legacy brand like that, it allows you to create that tension of having kind of one foot in the past and being able to mine, your legacy for trust, and then one foot in the future of continuing to make it fresh. I think the trick is to do it in a way where it's iconic. Like you're taking the legacy elements of the brand that are iconic and then finding little fresh ways to spin off of that. I think like kind of a dated example, but Absolute always did a great job of like they had their very iconic minimalist bottle and they constantly found ways to rip off of it. It's a lot of what I try to do with the hand wash too, of like, okay, this is our iconic shape. Now let's constantly find ways to make it fresh, but always reinforcing back to the core brand. It's tricky to do, but I think when you can do it, there's real magic. The ones who do it the best are the luxury brands, like under LVMH. Like they understand how to really continue, or like Hermes, right? Like they understand the core of that brand, but then find these unexpected ways to constantly represent it in a fresh way. I think that is the absolute best art of building a legacy brand.
Yeah, and I think um for us, it really does come back to what you think your brand is about, and feeling like if you're doing an extension or an acquisition, that it is building to that brand, and not, entirely borrowing from it, and that it's consistent with it. So, like I said before, our brand is about seeking the truth and helping people understand the world. While a game like Wordle is not necessarily imparting information, all our games are, they're fun, just like the category. But they're also, they feel like time well spent. It feels, if the New York Times had made a game, which we do. I think Wordle, people would have thought Wordle would be one of them. And so it makes sense. Same thing with, our largest acquisition in recent memory was The Athletic. If the Times had made a sports product, the quality, the rigor, the journalism that comes in The Athletic in their coverage makes sense. I work on Wirecutter, as we talked about. Wirecutter, which we acquired, was built on the idea of sort of the journalistic mindset and the journalistic process applied to product reviews. So all of those make sense for us to be doing. And therefore, I think that while there's obviously economic risks involved with any of those things and with anything you do, the sort of brand risk, it's building to what not a pivot. It's probably a version of Eric's 2 degrees away from not just the category, but from who you are and what your relationship with the customer is.
And one more question here.
We might actually have one more up here too. Yeah. Yes.
All right. First, a huge thank you to you both. Eric, I am also a former Fallon planner, so it's so exciting to see one of us make it to your level. And David, I listen to the Daily every day, so wonderful to see you both. My question is about partnership and collaboration. So Eric, I love finding the tension. I love thinking about brands and opportunities, and working on entrepreneurial ideas of my own. But when it comes to executing, are you one who thinks about building or buying or partnering to kind of get things moving? And likewise, David, just thinking from both of you as being those brand visionaries, who are the most important partners you have in the office?
Yeah, it reminds me of one of my favorite quotes by Steve Jobs, which is real artists ship. And I'm very much always focused on how do we execute in ideas. Like ideas are easy, execution's hard. So I go really quickly to always want to make sure whatever we're working on, there's a path to execution and being able to operationalize it. So I tend to be fairly pragmatic up front when we're ideating and not discarding ideas too early, but also really making sure that we're going down, we're not going down a cul-de-sac with an idea and any way to get there, right? If it's like partnering with someone else's technology, I love partnerships and collaborations. So, using other people's talents, gifts, whatever it takes to get something to market, whatever that path is, we always pursue it.
Yeah, I mean, I've always worked in pretty large organizations, so collaboration is the name of the game. I think the I said before how I don't really see that sort of I've changed a lot, sort of like the industries have changed, but like my jobs have changed a lot. The biggest change from Unilever to the Pinterest and New York Times jobs that I had was that I went from a place where marketing was the center of how the organization works to at Pinterest and the New York Times, it isn't, right? In this place, journalism is the center of the organization. And then product engineering and design and product development are next after that. And so marketing is, farther behind that. And I actually love that. I think that working in a place where the function that I'm working on is an important driver, but needs to work with others, it's what I get excited about. I think it's much more interesting that I get to explain why marketing matters, but when we talk about how to do the marketing, I get a lot of freedom. Whereas, when I was in consumer products, you didn't have to tell anybody why the marketing mattered, but everybody had an opinion no matter what they worked on. The person in charge of R&D was telling you how to make the ads. And that kind of thing doesn't happen in this environment. So I like that. And I love a digital product is by definition just incredibly collaborative and cross-functional. No one function can do it all or any of it. And so it's a great leadership challenge because you have to design systems where you have the accountability that people can, that people work best when they have that accountability, but that you have teams that are working on things and that are able to, ship, like you said, Eric. And in the end, it's about how much work you can put out.
Thank you, guys. We are at 5 o'clock, so I just want to check. Do you have time for one more question? There's one more in the crowd here. It sounds like a yes, like you can stick around for a couple more minutes. All right, thanks so much.
We can take one more.
Hello.
Yeah. If Eric can, I don't want to speak for him.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Thank you. So my question is about discontinued products. So you touched on this, David. I'd love to hear kind of how you handled when you discontinuing the New York Times Now product because it the features merged into your real product. And then Eric, I'm wondering which product that you've discontinued, have people most asked for? Could it potentially be one that I am really missing? And it is the dish soap, the foaming dish soap from Method. And I'd love to hear how that is not on the shelf anymore.
Oh my God, is that the spray one that we had a trigger?
Yes, and foams. Yes.
Yes, with the trigger and foams.
Why the discontinuation of the foams?
That was such a great product, and that is like the true innovation of a man who doesn't like doing the dishes and is lazy about it. And whenever you squirt something like it, just felt like dishes go faster. That's a great it just didn't sell well enough. It was just too much of a niche. But we also launched that pretty early, in our journey at Method. And I bet if they launched it now, it would work. But I agree with you. That was
Bring it back.
Yeah, I think that is such a great, I love that product. It just felt like you're like tacking your dishes. No, discontinuing products is so painful. It's like drowning your kittens. And you have to let them go to make room for new. But you always look at it as like, oh, so much work I put into this thing. And then of course, like many people don't know, discontinuing a product can be as expensive as launching a product because you got to pay all the markdowns and liquidate everything, and it's just not a fun process, but it's necessary. But I'm working on a different project for a client. I thank you for that idea.
Now we got to keep an eye out. Something's coming. I can see the steam. I think that assuming that we're not talking about discontinuing of an entire enterprise, and we're talking about just a product within something that's going to keep going, it's particularly hard because usually there is an audience for it. Like somebody liked it, right? And so then you've got the problem that you're disappointing somebody that you have an ongoing relationship with. I'm sure that was true for the spray you were talking about, right, Eric?
I just looked it up too. Yeah, the Power Foam spray. That was a great product.
We have years ago, we used to have a print bridge column, and they're famously, decade or so ago, we stopped it, and it had a huge audience, for what it was doing, and people were really angry about it. And so mostly the answer is, is just really try to communicate what you're doing and why you're doing it. But as Eric said, you kind of just have to make the hard choices and hold your breath and keep going. The most important thing is to give people something else that they can then glom onto. It may not be the thing they want, it may not be exactly what they wanted, but how do you try to keep that relationship? And how do you try to communicate with enough transparency and enough clarity that you don't lose trust about why, I made this decision. I'm not hiding anything from you. It's disappointing, but we're going to just keep going. I wish I had a better answer than that one.
Well, thank you guys so much. Unless you have follow-up.
Oh, I want to challenge actually them both to, in one sentence, what is the one takeaway that you would like each of us to walk away with today?
Buy my products.
Yeah. Seek out and engage with quality independent journalism.
Nice.
I'd say I'll give you the more serious one. I think AI is going to usher in taste and style will not go away, but I think with every new technology we go through, first a period, remember when clip art showed up on the scene and everybody overused it? Same thing with AI right now, and it'll slop, but eventually I think it's going to allow us to elevate these art forms even more.
Yeah, and I just think that I think that the more and more all these tools and everything's changing, the more and more I see that some of the fundamentals of brands and long-term relationships with customers just matter more and more and more. It may not, to your point, Dustin, there may be moments, there may be counterexamples, they may not last all that long. There may be moments where it feels less true, but I just believe that things end up back where they're supposed to be.
Well said.
All right. Yes. Thank you guys so much, Eric, Ryan, and David Rubin. Let's give them a hand here.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Sorry we weren't there in person today.
Yeah.
Yeah, wonderful perspectives. Thank you for sharing. One quick announcement. We'll be back next month, February 19th, with